Welcome back everyone. This is going to be part 2 of my series looking into controversial Super Nintendo games. Today we're continuing the journey with even more games that stirred the pot, whether it was due to violence, mature themes, or just being way ahead of their time. So let's get started with 10 more controversial Super Nintendo games. Pocky Rocky, released in 1993, was an adaptation of the Japanese game Kiki Kai Kai, a game deeply rooted in Shinto mythology. The game stars Pocky, a shrine maiden, and Rocky, her tanuki friend, as they combat various yokai in a cheerful yet action-packed adventure. However, the transition from its native Japanese setting to the Western market wasn't without its cultural bumps. The controversy surrounding Pocky Rocky mainly revolved around the game's localization process, which involved more than just a language translation. To make the game more accessible to Western audiences, developers often had to simplify or alter cultural references, sometimes at the expense of the game's original depth. For instance, the portrayal of Rocky the Tanuki was a focal point. In Japanese folklore, Tanuki are multifaceted creatures, embodying trickery, prosperity, and even having the ability to shapeshift. But in Pocky Rocky, Rocky was depicted as a more straightforward, less nuanced manner, focusing on his cuteness rather than his mythological significance. This simplification was critiqued for potentially reducing the rich tapestry of Shinto folklore to mere aesthetics, leading to discussions on cultural representation in video games. Critics and players argued that while the game aimed to entertain, it also had the responsibility to respect and convey cultural context from which it was born. These conversations reflected the growing pains of the gaming industry in the 90s, as it sought to balance cultural authenticity with commercial appeal on a global scale. Breath of Fire 2. While cherished by many, it wasn't without its share of controversy, primarily due to its content adjustments post-release. Originally launched in Japan in 1994, the game was developed by Capcom and presented a world rich with fantasy elements. However, when the game was prepared for the North American audience, it faced some significant alterations. One of the most notable changes was the removal or alteration of a subplot involving religious themes, where a character named Father Gannett was involved in a scheme to brainwash children. This was considered too sensitive or controversial for Western audiences at the time, leading to the plot being either cut or heavily modified. The controversy extended beyond the storyline censorship. Another aspect was the game's use of a quote-unquote dream mechanic, where the protagonist, Ryu, could enter people's dreams to uncover hidden truths. One such dream sequence involved a character experiencing what could be interpreted as sexual abuse, which was deemed inappropriate for a game intended for younger audiences. This, along with character designs and dialogues that were seen as potentially offensive or too mature, led Capcom to make several adjustments in the localization process. These changes sparked debates within the gaming community about censorship in video games, the ethics of altering content to fit cultural norms, and the impact of such changes on the original narrative and player experience. The case of Breath of Fire 2 serves as a notable example of the complexities involved in game localization, where the desire to protect sensibilities can clash with artistic integrity and narrative depth. Cheetah, Too Cool to Fool, released for the Super Nintendo in 1992, and found itself at the center of controversy primarily because of its promotional tactics and the character it featured. Developed as a tie-in to promote Frito-Lay's Cheetos brand, the game was criticized for its blatant use of product placement at a time when in-game advertising was not as common or accepted. Cheetah, the anthropomorphic mascot, famous for his cool demeanor and love of Cheetos, was essentially the game's protagonist, leading players through levels to collect Cheetos, which served as a health meter. This approach was seen by many as an aggressive marketing strategy targeting children, leveraging the popularity of video games to push a product. Moreover, the controversy was compounded by the game's quality and perceived lack of effort in its development. Gamers and critics alike slammed the game for its repetitive gameplay, poor level design, and overall lack of innovation or depth, which felt like it was designed more to advertise Cheetos than to provide an engaging gaming experience. This led to discussions about the ethics of using video games as product promotion, especially when aimed at children. The game became a case study in how far companies would go to market their products through interactive media, sparking debates on consumerism in gaming, the impact of corporate influence on game design, and the question of whether such games exploit young gamers' vulnerability to advertising. Drakkhen, released for the Super Nintendo in 1991, stands out in the annals of gaming history, not just for its innovative approach to the RPG genre, but also for the controversies it stirred among players and critics. Developed by Infogrames, this game introduced an open world where exploration was a key component, but it was the game's design choices and difficulty level that became points of contention. Players were thrust into a world with minimal guidance, requiring them to learn through exploration, and often through trial and error. This lack of hand-holding was seen by some as a refreshing challenge, while others found it frustratingly opaque, leading to discussions about the balance between difficulty and player engagement in video games. Another aspect of Drakkhen that sparked controversy was its combat system and character progression. Unlike many RPGs of its time, Drakkhen featured a real-time battle system where positioning and timing were crucial, rather than the turn-based mechanics prevalent in most RPGs. This system, along with the game's character leveling, which was not as straightforward as players expected, was divisive. Some players appreciated the strategic depth it added, while others felt cheated or confused by the lack of clear progression and the high difficulty curve. Furthermore, the game's translation from French to English was criticized for being poor, often leaving players puzzled by the game's narrative and interactions, which added to the game's notoriety. Drakkhen thus became a talking point about the expectations of game design, the importance of user interface and player experience, and the cultural and linguistic challenges in localizing games for different markets.
Attention, all Earthbound gamers. Ness is in trouble. He needs your help to defeat Gigagas, and in order to do this, he's going to need his trusty bat and a couple of burgers. To help him, all he needs is your credit card number, the expiration month and year, and the 3 digits on the back. But you have to be fast, though, before Gigagas finishes his plan to take over O-Net.
Earthbound, known as Mother 2 in Japan, launched in 1995 with the Super Nintendo and became a subject of controversy that intertwined cultural differences, localization challenges, and marketing decisions, making it a unique case study in the gaming world. One of the most notable controversies was its initial reception in North America. Despite its innovative approach to the RPG genre with a modern setting, quirky humor, and relatable characters, Earthbound faced criticism for not adhering to the traditional fantasy RPG tropes that were popular at the time. Its offbeat humor, including references to American culture and the game's slower pacing compared to action-packed RPGs, led to mixed reviews. Priced at around $69.99 when the game came out, which, adjusted for inflation to $2024, would be approximately $144.80, which reflected its perceived value or perhaps the cost of its unique localization. The marketing strategy for Earthbound further fueled discussions. Nintendo of America decided to significantly alter the game's content to make it more suitable for Western audiences. This included changing names, altering certain dialogues, and even removing or modifying cultural references that might not translate well. Alongside the game, Nintendo of America released a player's guide which was not just supplementary, it was essential for players to fully understand the game's mechanics, locations, and secrets, leading to outcry over the cost of entry for what was already an expensive game. To add an even more unique twist, the guide came with scratch and sniff cards, each corresponding to smells associated with different in-game locations, like the fresh scent of a forest or the stinky odor of a swamp. While this was an innovative promotional idea, it was also seen by some as gimmicky, contributing to the game's controversial reception regarding its value for money and the necessity of buying a guide to enjoy the game fully.
And now, this message.
Before we continue with this list, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you're thinking so far. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps more than you know. And while you're at it, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of my upcoming videos. Alright, back to the list. Final Fantasy VI, or Final Fantasy III in North America, stands as one of the most beloved entries in the Final Fantasy series. Yet it wasn't without its share of controversy, particularly in how it was initially presented to Western audiences. One of the major points of contention was the drastic localization changes made by Square to adapt the game for North American players. This included altering character names, simplifying the script significantly, removing references to religion, and even censoring certain dialogues to adhere to cultural sensitivities. For example, the character of Celeste, originally a former general of an empire, had her backstory and some of her abilities changed or omitted, which some fans felt diminished her complexity and the game's thematic depth. These alterations led to discussions about cultural adaptation versus maintaining the integrity to the original narrative. Moreover, Final Fantasy VI sparked controversy due to its ambitious scope and narrative themes, which were quite mature for the time, especially in the gaming industry. The game tackled themes like tyranny, redemption, and the human spirit, with a cast of characters each dealing with their own personal struggles, including issues of abandonment, mental health, and discrimination. The inclusion of such themes was groundbreaking but also raised eyebrows among some players and parents, who were accustomed to the more traditional, less introspective narratives of earlier RPGs. The game's darker tone, combined with the localization changes, created a divide in the fanbase, with some appreciating the depth and maturity, while others felt it strayed too far from the genre's expected escapism, or that the changes in the localization process compromised the story's integrity. This controversy underlined the ongoing debate within video games about content, localization, and the portrayal of complex, often adult themes in what was still largely considered a medium for younger audiences. Super Castlevania IV, released in 1991 for the Super Nintendo. And while it celebrated for its graphical advancements and gameplay enhancements over its predecessors, it didn't escape controversy, particularly in how it handled the series' traditional elements and its narrative approach. One of the primary points of contention was the significant changes to the game's story and characters. In an effort to make the game more accessible to Western audiences, Konami made several alterations, including the removal of religious imagery and themes that were more pronounced in earlier Castlevania games. This included changing the iconic cross whip to a morning star, which for some fans felt like a betrayal of the series' roots, diluting its gothic horror themes to fit a broader, perhaps less mature audience. Moreover, Super Castlevania IV stirred debate with its approach to gameplay mechanics. While the game was lauded for its fluid controls and the introduction of the 8-way whip movement, some of the traditional gameplay elements were simplified or removed. For instance, the sub-weapon system was altered, and the game's level design encouraged exploration less than previous entries, focusing more on linear progression. This shift was seen by some as a move toward making the game more straightforward, possibly at the expense of the series' challenging and exploratory nature. The controversy extended to the game's difficulty. It was perceived as considerably easier than its NES predecessors, leading to discussions about whether this was an evolution or a deviation from what made the Castlevania games challenging and rewarding. These changes sparked a debate on the game's design philosophy, the balance between accessibility and maintaining a series' core identity, and how developers adapt classic series for new platforms and audiences. Zombies Ate My Neighbors, launched in 1993 for the Super Nintendo, that mixed horror with humor. Yet it found itself amidst controversy primarily due to its content and the marketing strategies employed. The game featured a diverse array of enemies, ranging from the titular zombies to aliens, mummies, and even giant babies, set against suburban backdrops. However, what drew significant attention was the game's use of violence, albeit in a cartoony, exaggerated form. The idea of kids mowing down hordes of monsters with an arsenal of comic weapons like squirt guns and weed whackers was seen by some as potentially desensitizing or even glorifying violence. This led to discussions on the impact of video game violence on younger players, especially at a time when such debates were becoming more prevalent in media and society. Adding to the controversy was the game's packaging and promotional material. The cover art depicted a scene of apparent chaos with children facing off against a horde of zombies, which some critics argue could be seen as promoting violence or fear among children. Moreover, the game included Easter eggs and humorous references that might have gone over the heads of younger players, but could be perceived as inappropriate by parents or adults. While the humor was intended to be lighthearted and satirical, it raised questions about the appropriateness of content in games marketed toward a younger audience. Despite these controversies, Zombies Ate My Neighbors has been recognized for its unique charm, blending horror with comedy in a way that, while controversial, contributed to its cult status among gamers. Cool World. The Super Nintendo game, released in 1992 to coincide with the film of the same name, quickly became embroiled in controversy for several reasons, reflecting broader issues around game adaptations, marketing, and content suitability. The game was licensed from the movie, which itself was controversial for its mix of live action and animation, and for themes some considered too adult for its target audience. The video game adaptation faced similar criticism, especially regarding its attempt to capture the essence of a film that dealt with mature themes like lust, identity, and the blurring lines between reality and fiction. Critics argued that the game, while toned down, still hinted at these adult themes through its narrative and character interactions, raising the question of whether such content was appropriate for the console's primary demographic of younger players. Moreover, the gameplay and overall quality of Cool World were points of contention. Players and reviewers noted that the game did not effectively translate the movie's unique visual style or its storyline into an engaging video game experience, resulting in a product that felt rushed or underdeveloped. The game's level design was criticized for being repetitive, and the controls were often described as clunky. This perceived a lack of effort or understanding in adapting the film's concept into gameplay led to discussions about the integrity of video game adaptations from other media at the time. It also highlighted the challenges developers faced in trying to balance the appeal of a known IP with the need to create a game that stood on its own merits. The controversy surrounding Cool World thus served as a case study in the complexities of game development, particularly in the context of movie tie-ins during the early 90s, where the push for quick market products sometimes overshadows quality and appropriateness. Illusion of Gaia, released for the Super Nintendo in 1994, was a game that not only offered a compelling narrative, but also stirred controversy due to its thematic depth and its approach to certain sensitive topics. Developed by Quintet, the game was praised for its unique blend of action RPG elements with a story that explored philosophical and existential themes, including the meaning of life, death, and the essence of humanity. However, this narrative ambition led to controversy, especially with its handling of real-world historical events like the Holocaust. In one of its later stages, the game featured a town reminiscent of a concentration camp. While not explicitly detailed, was enough to spark debate about the appropriateness of including such dark historical references in a video game, particularly one that could be played by children. This led to discussions on whether video games should delve into such heavy topics or if they are better suited to lighter, escapist entertainment. Another dimension of controversy surrounding Illusion of Gaia was its exploration of religious themes. The game included scenes that could be interpreted as questioning or critiquing religion, particularly through the protagonist's interaction with various statues representing different world religions. This was seen by some as potentially offensive or provocative given the sensitive nature of religious beliefs. Critics and players debated whether such narrative elements were a bold artistic choice or an overstep in a medium still finding its footing in addressing complex societal issues. The game's approach to these themes highlighted the evolving role of video games as a narrative medium capable of sparking discussions on existential, historical, and philosophical questions. Yet it also underscored the challenges developers face when attempting to incorporate mature themes into games, especially considering the broad audience range of console gaming in the 90s. And that wraps up our second video on looking at some controversial games for the Super Nintendo. As you've seen, these games did far more than entertain. They sparked controversies that have influenced how we perceive gaming culture even now. From debates over censorship and violent content to pushing the technical limits of the console, these titles have significantly broadened the scope of what video games can represent, often igniting passionate discussions in the process. The Super Nintendo wasn't just about charming graphics and memorable soundtracks. It was a platform where developers dared to explore themes that could unsettle, inspire, and challenge conventional norms. Thanks for sticking with me through this journey. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Which of these games stood out to you? Let's continue this discussion down in the comments. If you liked this video, please leave a like. If you didn't, that other button seems to work pretty well too. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing to stay up to date on future videos. If you would like to support the channel in a more personal way, please consider becoming a member or checking out the links in the description below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.